Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. This is Celine and today we're going to talk about 4 things you probably haven't heard about Jane Eyre. I've listed all my sources in the description below, so if you're curious, feel free to check them out. Now, let's get started. So if you're watching this video, I'm assuming you've either read the novel or watched one of its many adaptations. If you haven't, just a quick heads up. This video contains major spoilers, so keep that in mind before watching. And just in case you need a little refresher, here's a quick summary. Jane Eyre follows the life of an orphan girl who grows up facing cruelty, loneliness, and hardship. After a harsh childhood at Gateshead and Lowood School, Jane becomes a governess at Thornfield Hall, where she meets the mysterious Mr. Rochester. The two fall in love, but Jane discovers that he's hiding a dark secret. His wife, Bertha Mason, is alive and locked away in the attic. Heartbroken, Jane leaves Thornfield and struggles to survive on her own, but eventually fate brings her back to Rochester, now blind and humbled after fire destroyed his home. In the end, they reunite and finally find peace together. Now here are 4 things you probably haven't noticed in Jane Eyre. First of all, Jane Eyre is a Bildungsroman, a German word that literally means novel of formation or novel of education. It's a literary genre that follows the moral and psychological growth of the main character from childhood to adulthood. In most traditional examples, the hero is male and his journey involves leaving home, exploring the world, gaining education, and finally achieving independence or social integration. For women, however, this model rarely applied. Their lives were often confined to what was called the domestic sphere, the private world of home, family, and caregiving, which was seen as separate from the public, male-dominated world of work, travel, and education. Charlotte Brontë does something revolutionary in Jane Eyre. She takes this traditionally male pattern of development and reshapes it for a woman's experience. Jane's life unfolds through a series of journeys from Gateshead to Lowood to Thornfield, Moor House, and finally Friendene. And each place represents a stage in her emotional and spiritual growth. The novel adopts the classic structure of a male Bildungsroman but subverts its resolution. The second thing you might not have noticed is how places in Jane Eyre reflect Jane's psychological states. The childhood home, Gateshead, symbolizes oppression and confinement. The famous Red Room scene represents patriarchal authority, punishment, and the repression of female anger and passion. It's a haunting space where Jane first experiences fear and injustice, emotions that will shape her sense of self throughout the novel. Gateshead becomes a site of psychological imprisonment and even the beginning of sexual and emotional awakening as Jane starts to rebel against the authority that seeks to silence her. When Jane moves to Lowood School, she enters another restrictive institution. Although it provides education and moral guidance, it also teaches submission and self-control. Jane internalizes this discipline, becoming stronger and more self-reliant, but also emotionally repressed. Then comes Thornfield Hall. At first, it appears to be a place of safety and belonging, but it soon turns into a symbol of patriarchal power and secrecy. The hidden attic and Bertha Mason's imprisonment mirror Jane's own fear of being trapped, both socially and emotionally, within marriage. Bertha is often described as Jane's dark double or her doppelganger, a literary term from German that means double-goer or double self. In literature, a doppelganger represents the hidden or repressed aspects of a character's personality. Bertha expresses the rage and rebellion that Jane must suppress to remain socially acceptable. After Jane leaves Thornfield, she reaches Moor House, marking her phase of true independence. At Whitcross, a symbolic crossroads, she chooses solitude and moral integrity over emotional compromise. Her time at Moor House brings her family, wealth, and self-respect, qualities that make her Rochester's equal when they reunite. Still, Her dreams and emotions remain tied to him, reminding us that complete independence for a woman in the 19th century is never fully possible. The third thing you might not have noticed is how Jane Eyre explores the balance between passion and reason. You've probably already noticed that Jane's strong moral values are one of the most striking themes in the novel. But when we look deeper, we see that her struggle between emotion and morality begins very early, back at Gateshead. As a child, Jane faces cruelty and injustice, which awaken her passionate nature and her yearning for love and freedom. Yet her anger, though justified, risks turning into bitterness and despair. At lower school, figures like Helen Burns and Miss Temple guide her toward faith and moral discipline. They teach her a kind of spiritual patience that tempers her passion without destroying it. This marks Jane's first step from resentment toward a deeper moral optimism rooted in forgiveness and endurance. Later, at Thornfield Hall, Jane's love for Mr. Rochester becomes a test of her conscience. She experiences deep affection and temptation, but when she discovers that Rochester is already married to Bertha Mason, she refuses to become his mistress, not merely out of social propriety, but because doing so would violate her moral integrity and her faith in divine justice. This is one of the most defining moments in Jane's moral growth. Her time at Moor House presents the opposite challenge, a trial of faith and duty. St. John Rivers, with his cold missionary zeal, represents spiritual repression. His proposal offers Jane moral purpose, but denies her emotional life. By rejecting him, Jane chooses a balanced path between passion and duty, between love and self-respect. Finally, her return to Rochester at Ferndean brings synthesis and redemption. Their reunion symbolizes a reconciliation of opposites, spirit and body, reason and emotion, self and other. Rochester's physical blindness mirrors Jane's earlier moral blindness, and both characters are purified through suffering. Ferndean, though isolated, represents not confinement, but inner peace and restored faith. So, Jane's moral values are not just about restraint or propriety. They are about her journey toward harmony, learning how to balance passion and reason, love and integrity. And the last thing, something I find really fascinating and rarely discussed, is the use of language in Jane Eyre. In the novel, the power of speech is everything. The ability to speak or to stay silent dominates the world Jane Eyre lives in. Her central journey isn't just social or romantic, it's also linguistic. It's a struggle to find her own voice, to put her experience into words, and to tell her story truthfully. Although Jane's narration feels deeply personal, her story is constantly being told for her and about her by others, by Mrs. Reed, Mr. Rochester, and St. John Rivers, all of whom try at different points to define her or silence her. The novel traces Jane's transformation from a silent, powerless child into a woman who owns her voice and her story. As a child, Jane retreats into silence, escaping into books. Her earliest attempts at a speech are raw and imitative, like when she angrily calls John Reed a murderer and a slave driver, borrowing words from her reading to fight back against oppression. Then comes the stage of learning language. Jane struggles to understand the meaning of words like master and benefactress, realizing how language itself can be used to reinforce power and hierarchy. In the Red Room, we see the failure of sound. Her terrified scream has no power. It doesn't save her, but when she finally learns to use words instead of mere noise, she begins to find her strength. Her first real moment of freedom comes in her conversation with Mr. Lloyd. the apothecary. It's the first time she gets to tell her own story, and that act of speaking truth leads directly to her escape from Gateshead. In Jane Eyre, words have the power to change lives. By the end, Jane learns control over her voice. She evolves from the child who lashes out in anger at Mrs. Reed to the calm, honest woman who speaks frankly and truthfully to Bessie, a transformation Bessie herself recognizes when she says, "You've got quite a new way of talking." Throughout the novel, speech becomes a tool for identity. To speak is to exist, to claim truth, and to define oneself against a world that tries to define you. And that, perhaps, is the deepest message of Jane Eyre, that freedom and identity begin with the courage to speak. And that's it for today's video. I hope these ideas gave you a new way to look at Jane Eyre, not just a love story, but as a journey of growth, language, and self-discovery. If you enjoyed this analysis, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear how you interpret Jane's story. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next ones.